Hey, is this being taped, Jay? I was texting you about that. I just want to know.
Live stream.
Is it really being live streamed? Because that makes me kind of nervous. So I'm here to talk about the idea. And the reason I'm talking about that is because I think you can take a dipstick team. You can screw up in all sorts of different ways. And if you have a good idea, you're still going to do really well. And a lot of folks start with a bad idea, but somehow or another they find their way. Don't worry. Do you want me to just do it without the slides?
Get it.
All right.
Here. Sorry, keep going.
Okay. So anyway, I thought I would start just by talking about sort of the central emotion that I have as somebody that's started a company, as somebody that's run a startup company, and that is that I've often felt somewhat disreputable. And I always feel like a fraud, that someone is going to sort of expose that we don't really know what we're doing, that our product doesn't really work, that we're just sort of finding our way as we go. Does anyone know who that is in the picture? Any guesses? It's Fyodor Dostoevsky, the writer of Crime and Punishment. And there's an opening scene in Crime and Punishment. It's one of my favorite scenes, which captures this sense of fraudulence and why it qualifies you to be a great entrepreneur. So there's a drunk called Marmeladov, and he sees the main character, Raskolnikov, and the first thing he says to him is, I dare you to deny that I am a wretch. And Raskolnikov sizes him up and says, I can't, you are a wretch. And then Marmeladov tells him a story of how Jesus will see all these wretched people who show up at the pearly gates after they die. And he'll wave them through. And the men of wisdom and the men of understanding will say, why did you do this? Why would you ever take such wretches? And Jesus will say, because they never thought themselves worthy of it. And I think the best entrepreneurs are people who are so keenly aware of all the different ways that you could fail. And I feel like when you get up on this stage and you tell a story of how your startup has succeeded, you just edit out all the different ways that you thought you could fail. And then when you're going through that experience yourself, it doesn't seem like the story that people tell on the stage and you lose heart. You start to wonder, well, why is this so hard for me when it was so easy for Mark Zuckerberg or when it was so easy for Bill Gates? Well, in fact, I think it's really hard for almost everyone, and we have these serious moments of doubts, and they start at the most fundamental level with questions around whether you have the right idea. So in talking to you, I just wanted to set the playing field level, and that is that I think we all have these doubts, and then you just have to figure out whether or not you can overcome them. So the first thing that I would recommend to you is that you should just be yourself. And I know that's trite advice, but so many people spend all their lives trying to sound grown up, stuck up, like IBM or whatever big company they're supposed to admire. And in fact, what people crave more than anything else in this personality-starved world is just one little bit of genuine emotion, of real personality. The first thing that I ever found out about Atlassian, I'd never heard of the company. I'd heard of the product, but I'd never really heard of the company. And then Jay Simons, who was just up here, told me that he was going to work there, and he said, the best thing about this company is their motto is, don't fuck the customer. And I told about 1,000 people that. I just loved that. I couldn't believe that somebody had the temerity to say that as their motto. And then I saw it on the slides, and for the first time I realized he was telling the truth. I thought it was just a joke. So I don't think people realize just how hard it is to be yourself. And if you have these doubts as an entrepreneur, I think sometimes surfacing them can actually make you a more real person. So the most compelling story in the world is actually that you have a new company and that you have an idea that might not work. So when I was first launching Redfin, which is this online real estate company, I don't know which story to tell you first, but I totaled my car on the way. I was driving to the airport and I was late. And so I was going around 75 miles an hour, and I thought I could hold the lane in the freeway, and instead I just skidded across the whole freeway, and then somebody smashed into me. He was totally high on drugs, and he had a van full of stolen bicycles, and I gave him $500, and I drove to the airport, and I thought I was going to make it, but then the car was so smashed in that I couldn't access the trunk that had my computer in it, And the website wasn't working, so I had a demo that was running local on my machine or something like that. And so I had to get the computer. I got a crowbar from a cabbie by paying him money, but then I realized I didn't have any money. Then he wanted the crowbar back, and I said, you can't have the crowbar back, I'll pay you later. And then he said, no, I want the crowbar back. And I said, who's holding the crowbar? Then I finally got the computer, and I missed my flight. And I thought, oh my God, I got a meeting with the New York Times, and I just totaled my car. And actually, I didn't even care about the car. And I'm going to miss this meeting. And I was so despondent that I drove my car back home, and I kind of sat on the floor and wept. And my wife talked me into calling the editor of the New York Times, Damon Darlin, and just telling him the whole goofy story. And so I said, listen, you need to hear all of this. I know that you're a busy man, but I have gone through hell trying to get to you. And if you will still meet me at 5 o'clock today, I will find a way to get down there. And he said, sure, come on down. And so I got there, and it turned out that Zillow, which had raised around $30 million, was launching on the same day. And we had a few $100,000, and he asked us how much money we had, and I said, not very much. And he said, millions? And I said, no. And he said, how are you going to fix your car? And I said, well, I've got some savings. And then on the way out, he asked me whether I thought it would really work. And a sudden moment of candor washed over me. And I was holding the elevator door open, and it was starting to close even though I was holding it open. And I said, you know how there are those penguins that queue up because no one wants to jump into the water first because they could get eaten by a shark? Sometimes I'm worried that we're going to be that penguin, that we're going to get into the water first and do something really new and exciting in real estate, and then we're just going to get devoured. And at that moment, he decided that he liked us and that we were being sincere and being real. And we were sort of featured in a story about how real estate was going to change, and he said that even though there's this company that's raised millions of dollars, I think there's another one that's more interesting. And it's because I think we built that genuine relationship with one another, and to this day we remain really good friends. And so I think what's most interesting about you isn't that you're making billions of dollars, isn't that you employ thousands of people, but that you've taken this crazy risk. So you don't have to pretend that you're cool, that you have a prom date, that you drive a fancy car, or anything else like that. You just have to be yourself, and that's the story that the world most wants to hear. One other little story that I'll tell you is that I used to get off the train at 4 Embarcadero, just down the street from here, and go into the Hyatt for free pastry because people just assumed that you belong there. And I was walking past this, this conference, and I heard somebody say, it was a retirement party or something like that for an advertising executive, and he was a cranky old guy. And he said that there's only 2 things in the world that have ever worked in advertising, and he spent his whole life trying to come up with something better than those 2 things. And those 2 things were free and new. He said, if you say I've got something new, everybody pays attention. If you've got something free, everybody pays attention. So I've always banked on doing both of those things and being interesting. So when you're a new company, I think you can be really genuine, and that's going to form the personality for the rest of the history. I'm not going to repeat what the earlier speaker said about being the first customer, but I do know a lot of guys who try to manufacture an idea. So you get a bunch of dudes in a room, and you try to think about software for dentist offices or something you can make for senior citizens when you're 23 years old. And I would just remember what Mike Moritz said, which is that the best software is written by people under 35 who are building it for themselves. When asked what about the people over 35, he reminded the world that Amadeus Mozart was dead by the time he was 35. I am now 39. And I still think I've got a lot of ideas left in me, but I do think you have to build something that you want to use yourself and that you have passion for. And I used to try to hide the passion that I have for whatever I was doing because I wanted to seem very professional, very credible. And now I just think it's better to let it all hang out and say, I think this is the best fucking thing in the world. You've just got to see it. And most people aren't going to say, no, I don't think I'm interested. Usually if you have some passion for it, that's going to be contagious. I do think, though, that you can get kind of hung up on the technology and not realize that you want to find a way to get people's wallets open. And I remember when I was presenting to Sequoia Capital, which ended up funding us, I talked to Doug Leone, who was an old salesman. I think he was from HP. He was an early salesman at HP, and he's sort of the resident tough guy at Sequoia, and they're sort of all tough guys. I got very excited about how this technology was going to integrate different data systems. And he sort of interrupted me and said, I'm listening to you. in my ears. They're lying on the fucking ground. I can't believe what I'm hearing. And sort of this dazed smile showed up on my face because I thought, oh, this is going well. And then he said, but my wallet is right in my pocket. And then I knew that we were going down because he thought that nobody would actually pay for this, that I'd never given him a compelling reason to actually buy it. And if you read Redfin's blog, you know that we have long been an opponent, actually, of not having a business model where you fundamentally ask customers for money. So we let people browse the web for free. Jay Simons can browse redfin.com all that he likes, but when we actually help people buy or sell a home, we charge them about $8,000. And I think fundamentally Steve Jobs has proven that if you make something really beautiful, you can make money the old-fashioned way by sticking your hand out and asking them for money. And if you haven't market tested that when you're thinking about the idea, if people say, oh, well, that sounds nice, I think I might use it, that's far different from somebody saying, that is so freaking awesome, I'm going to get my money out and give it to you. By the way, I had another meeting with Sequoia, like 7 or 8 years later, where we were trying to raise money from them for Redfin. And Doug Leone, excuse me, not Doug Leone, who is that guy? Roloff Bota, who came from PayPal or YouTube, I can't remember which, maybe he came from both, but he's sort of a big shot at Sequoia now, kind of came in and said, listen, I've got this investment thesis that you have to be one of the 7 deadly sins. I don't believe in altruism. I don't believe in idealism. Somehow you have to appeal to some base instinct of humanity. And which one do you guys have? And I said, oh my God, we've got nearly all 7. I mean, covetousness, lust, pride, envy, wrath. We sort of went through it, and that's what persuaded him to be interested in us, but not actually interested enough to give us any money. So I think the really hard thing when you're trying to come up with a company is not actually to think about the problem. Somebody who ran Europe for a company that I co-founded, Plumtree Software, his name was Charlie Abrams. And let me tell you one little story about Charlie, just because he's one of my favorite people. He said a couple of things that really stayed with me and that I think are unique to sales. So number one, he said, I like to hire people who, if a gun were put to your head and the trigger had to be pulled, that they could do it. And then he also said that he liked to hire people that could make you smile. And he started almost every meeting I ever had with him by telling a joke, which I really enjoyed. But mostly he did these, the thing that I remember best about him is that he did these calls where we updated the pipeline, and he would mute the phone while he shot animals from his bedroom window. And I'm a vegetarian. I sort of had to say, Charlie, can you please stop shooting the animals? But Charlie liked to talk about waving a magic wand, where he said, let's not think about whether or not we can solve this problem, but let's just imagine a world where if we could solve this problem, what would it be like? And I think that's a really useful exercise for startups. This is probably the best advice I could give you, because so often you get hung up on whether or not a solution is feasible. And generally the problem that engineers have isn't that they can't solve a problem, it's that the problem they're solving isn't really worthwhile. I know so many guys that have started companies where they tilted a windmill, and when they finally knocked the windmill down, they realized that it wasn't even a worthwhile effort. And what I would rather do is have some problem that is so difficult to solve that we know that if we solve it, we're going to make a lot of money. And then you can commit yourself wholeheartedly to solving the problem, because otherwise you're always going to be wondering as you work on the solution to the problem, well, what if I'm banging my head against a wall and when I finally get through the wall, there's nothing on the other side? That, I think, is the worst problem. And so I always try to imagine a problem where if we solved it, it would really be worth something. And I don't try to focus too much on whether or not it can be solved. And I actually drew some inspiration for this from Jonathan Sposato, the founder of Picnic, which is an online photo editing site. And Jonathan just said that to make money, you have to do something hard. So they set out to basically create Photoshop, which is a very processor-intensive software application, and put the whole thing on the web using Flash. And when you hear that, you just think that's crazy. But they spent 2 years working on it, and that whole 2 years, it wasn't so bad because they knew that if they actually did it, it would be a runaway hit, which is exactly what it was. It was just bought from Google for about $50 million. So Jonathan just did a great job. And when I think about all the problems in the world that I want to solve, it just feels like we're surrounded by imperfections in the most frustrating way. And you can sort of imagine whatever could make the world better from your perspective. From my perspective, I feel like there's a ton of things that I want. I want an email every day that tells me something fun to do that's personalized based on my interest in cycling or literature or software or whatever it may be. I want a way to order the same cup of hot chocolate from Starbucks using my mobile phone so that I don't have to walk in there and talk to someone and then wait for it to come and then give them my credit card. I want to send items for everything I do in my life. So that I can go back and see where I've been and how I've spent my money and who I've emailed and who I've called all in one place. I love being able to settle arguments, by the way, by looking in my sent mail. I just want that for everything. What's funny is that you always think you're going to win the argument, and then you open up the email and you close it right back up. You're like, guess I didn't say that. And then the person that you argued with sends you the email that you just closed. Something else that I learned from Jonathan that was really hard for me to appreciate, and I think that the fact that Atlassian has done this is a tribute to them because so many enterprise software companies don't. I'm not sure if Atlassian qualifies as that, but it's definitely more important in the consumer world that you sometimes need to think like a gamer. So many of us at Redfin come from enterprise software, and our goal in enterprise software is to solve a problem with a minimum of fuss, just in the most elegant way possible, but without actually trying to make it beautiful. And most of the people who started Picnic, which really influenced Redfin, actually worked on Halo and Halo 2. So they would spend 14 hours trying to make sure that the ammo that's flying out of the gun and bouncing off the lunar craft or the warthog or whatever the heck it is bounces off in exactly the right way to please people. And if you've ever registered on Picnic, you know that they nailed it. You know, as you fill in each field, more dandelions pop up. And it's hard to underestimate how important or overestimate how important that is. I mean, I watch my wife use Picnic, and as each dandelion pops up, she's like, oh. She really, really likes it. You can go too far that way. I think that you want to keep things simple in some ways, but I've always been surprised when just using or switching to consumer how important it is to actually delight people, not just to solve the problem, not just to show them the information about a house or whatever you're trying to do, but to actually raise one of their eyebrows and make them smile. Just a few other things that I want to talk to you about. I talked to you earlier about the importance of personality, and I think the opposition to that is the focus group. I do think that focus groups are useful, but the more time I spend in consumer, the more I think that it tends to muddle you a little bit. If you'd put "Don't fuck the customer" in a focus group, they would not have gone with it. They would have said, wow, that might offend someone. It doesn't offend me, of course, but it might offend somebody else, and we really shouldn't do that. And so you lose what's distinctive about your brand. But having said that, I do think it's useful to at least hear it and then decide to go ahead and do whatever you want to do. And I think most people spend too much time putting together a focus group, and especially putting together the slides for a focus group. We often put together 10 or 15 slides for a focus group, and we only get to the second slide. So we'll show 1 or 2 screenshots, and people will have an immediate visceral reaction to that, and they'll talk about their experiences searching for real estate or using our service. And we just end up asking them questions. The more prepared you are, the more talking that you're going to do, and the less you're going to be able to listen. I also don't think that you need to hire a firm or anything else. You can just get 6 or 7 people off your website who just registered and email them right back and say, I know this is a violation of your privacy, but I saw that you just registered. Would you mind coming into our office for some sushi and beer? And they're like, yeah, that's fine. I've noticed also that when you ask people what they like, they always know, but when you ask them why, they just make up something. They actually can't rationalize their emotions. So they try to say something that sounds plausible and credible, but they're not actually saying something that's genuine. So I just think that you can get value out of focus groups, but only if you don't prepare too much. And I would tell you that don't have the marketing department run the focus group unless you're also going to invite the engineers, because otherwise you're going to argue afterwards about what people said, whereas if everyone's there, you kind of have those voices in your head. We did not do a usability study for a long time, and And I just didn't think, I thought I knew what people would say. And what's weird is that I did, but when they said it, I felt like I really had to do it. In fact, what was really weird is that when people brought up our website, before they even did anything, I already started to want to change it because I would see the look on their face and I'd be like, oh my God, yeah, I know, I know. And then they'd be like, what the hell is this? And they'd try to figure something out, and it was really painful. So it just gives urgency to things you know you have to do. I'm not going to talk too much about surveys, even though I love the story of Shane Battier, and I was going to find a way to loop it in. Do you know what these two guys are doing? I took this picture off of Flickr. They're both looking at the cheerleaders in a basketball game. I did want to talk to you, though, about having to change the idea. So it's always hard because people tell you two things that are basically contradictory. They're going to tell you that you have to stay true to yourself, that you have to be distinctive in your personality, that you have to build software that you want to use, and then at the same time say that you have to be flexible and iterative and change when you hear the customer wanting something else. And I've just never known when to give in and when to stay true. And the guy on the far left in this picture, Mark Singer, has really helped me through that. He's just talked about it not from a technology perspective, but from a retail perspective, and said it is the most natural thing in the world for you not to get the idea right in the first place, for you not to get the pricing right, for you not to get the positioning right, for you not to get the product right. And what made me okay with that was that I felt like the values of the company would stay consistent. So Redfin's mission has never changed. You know, we want to change the whole real estate game in consumers' favor. We said that from day one, and that's still what we're trying to do. But how we've done that has changed radically. And at first, it was hard for me to admit that I was wrong about anything, which is what you have to do before you can change. But the way that I became comfortable with that is by insisting that the mission of the company would stay the same, even if the way that we accomplished it was different. And what really motivated me was this idea that somebody else, after I got fired, would come in and immediately make 3 or 4 changes that I already knew had to be made, but couldn't quite get myself to do it. And that person would then take credit for everything great that was already latent in Redfin, which would drive me absolutely nuts. And I used to say to myself that if somebody else ran Redfin, they could make so much more money from it than if I could. And I thought, well, what would they do? Well, they would start doing this, this, and this, and this. And then I sort of made a list and said, all right, we're going to do this. And so you compete with your successor almost by being your successor. You sort of have to destroy yourself in a systematic way. How much time do I have, Jay? I can't read that thing. I don't need much time. There's one last thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Does anybody know who this is? Alan Keyes, that's right. And how did he get famous? So he competed with Barack Obama as an outsider for his Illinois Senate seat. Do you know what happened to the guy before that guy? So Barack Obama is one of the luckiest people in the world. I mean, I'm not making a political statement. I voted for him. But the other guy, yeah. So I think he like forced his wife into group sex, and then it came out, and he had to drop out. And then this guy is almost as big of a nut job, and he ran against Obama. There was no way Obama was going to lose that one. So Alan Keyes is sort of a unique character. He has very strong, highly conservative opinions, and I've always sort of respected him for being really direct about those opinions. So he thinks, for example, and I don't agree with this at all, that that homosexuality is some kind of biblical abomination or something ridiculous like that. And whenever he started to get any momentum in his campaign, these students would follow him around and they would ask him, Alan, do you believe in civil rights? And he would say, yes. And then they would say, well, what about civil rights for gay people? And before they could finish the sentence, he would say, homosexuality is an abomination. And he would melt down right there and totally lose it. And people would be like, that guy's a freak. And he was. Very intelligent freak. Short man, large feet. But here's the point of the story. This is why I like Alan Keyes, and I genuinely like him. he was asked, he ran for president, I think in '92. And he was asked why he was running when it was so obvious that he wasn't going to win. And you have to know one more thing about Alan Keyes. This is another reason I love him. It's another hotel story for you. So he hated Bob Dole. He was competing with Bob Dole for the Republican nomination. And he would follow Dole around because they had the same states that they had to visit to win the primaries or the caucuses. And whenever he checked into a hotel room, he would just say, "I'm with the Dole campaign." And then they would put him into a room and charge it to Bob Dole. And, he was asked, you know, why are you doing this? Why are you being this way when you know you can't win? And he would say that some calculation of whether I can win or lose isn't what's supposed to animate a campaign. Aren't we supposed to be running for office in a democracy because we really believe in our positions? And he just made this comparison to Bob Dole that has always stayed with me. He said that Bob Dole has made so many compromises in terms of what he believes in that if he loses, he can't run again. If he loses everything. Whereas when I lose nothing. I can run over and over and over again, and I will have lost nothing because I've been true to myself. And every one of us is worried that when you start a company or when you run a company, that the people that have chosen to follow you have somehow been duped into it, and that they'll be angry when they realize that the product doesn't work, that you don't have any sales, and that you might fail. But if you're actually fairly transparent about that and open about that, you can sort of fail over and over again, and those people are going to want to work with you over and over again. I mean, I don't know if you can fail 7 times, but I think that I've always felt that if Redfin doesn't work out, I'm going to be all right. And the reason that I'm going to be all right with it is that I've always tried to do the right thing by the customer and the employees and everything else, and that it was a really worthy problem to work on. And so that's been the insurance that's allowed me to take all sorts of crazy risks. So anyway, that's all I had to say about trying to figure out the right idea to focus on. Thanks for your time.